Welcome to the Hunt Report. Today we're going to go out to the streets of New York City with my friend Olivia, fantastic singer, and we're going to test out the SONY 50-1.8 in the full frame edition versus the 50-1.8 in the APS-C edition. Tell me about the Apollo.
I've sang at the Apollo 5 times now, so...
Oh my God!
Yeah.
Was it your own show? Is it part of someone else's show?
No, it's for amateur night.
Right.
Yeah,
And do they do the hook and cane?
Yeah, somebody kicks you off if you
Did
stop.
you get kicked off?
No.
So you heard it right here. Olivia does not get kicked out of the Apollo. She is a rock star. She is a jazz blues star.
Yeah?
She's the real deal. So this is the SONY full frame at f1.8. Very nice background blur and decent sharpness. And this was before I did the firmware update, which we're going to cover later in the segment. So it's a decent result given that this product is around $200. And here's a beautiful shot from the APS-C version, and I'm not seeing a whole lot of difference. But let's go ahead into the laboratory and test two things: sharpness, bokeh, and lens flare. And I just wanted to give you some real-world examples before we get a little more precise. So let's go ahead and do that right now. I'm not going to show you the up close from the fields because the focus wasn't exactly identical, and that makes perfect sense. These weren't under laboratory conditions, but I did go back into the studio to shoot my helpful little bumblebee here. I haven't exactly figured out a name for him yet. And again, we took the, let's see what we have here on the left. We have the A7S II with the full frame 50-1.8, and then we have the A6000 with the APS-C 50-1.8. And while this isn't a perfect comparison, because the megapixels aren't identical, it is a pretty good comparison. All right, so we're zoomed to 1:1 right here. And now let's make that the same size as a 1:2 zoom. And I'm really not seeing any huge differences in sharpness. If you go 1:1 there, you know, you see some of these kind of blurring effects, but we make them the same size so that we can really get a proper comparison. Again, the focus was at the same point. The light was identical. Tried to just make this as scientific as possible. And then what I really like is this little tuft of hair right here. And maybe the APS-C is sharper, just by a smidge. And I don't think it's the end of the world. That said, these are $250 lenses, you know, which is, you know, not really at the professional price point. Should it be at the professional price point? Whatever, you get what you pay for. Not terribly unsharp on the full frame over here. And my gut tells me that the APS-C is slightly sharper. If you need a full frame camera, you're going to want a professional grade lens. And let's really save my conclusion for the end of the segment. Now, my first reaction is I just like the APS-C bokeh on the right better. It's less hexagonal, and it just has this quality to it, this sort of dimly lit quality. And you compare it to the bokeh on the left, and it's a little more ovular, which does happen even in the best of lenses towards the edges, and it's just more hexagonal on the left. So Sony seems to have dropped the bar of quality for its full frame lens. What a shame. Naturally, as we stop up the aperture all the way to f16, things get more hexagonal. And that's just pretty self-explanatory. And for a $250 lens, I'm not going to expect much else. But it's really that lens manufacturers are starting to pay attention to the shape of the bokeh. So let's go ahead and test the lens flare. Star and lens flare test of the full frame at f1.8, f2.2, 2.5, 2.8, 3.2. Let's bring up the ISO. Very nice lens flare. Very nice lens flare. Slightly hexagonal. Now let's look at the star. 4, 4, 5. Some hexagonality in the lens flare. But let's just look at the star. 50, 63, 8, f8. Ooh, look at that. Ooh, look at that at f22, really nice. All the way. Wide open at f22 on the full frame lens. Lens flare at f1.8 on the APS-C is not looking as good as the full frame. Really have to admit that. Let's go up to f2.8, f3.5, 4.0, 5.0. Let me ISO up a little more. Yeah, lens flare is much better on the full frame. Very good. And I would say the starring at f8 I like better on the full frame as well. We're recording. We haven't done the firmware update. Let's listen to the lens. Alright, that's just not acceptable, but let's see how it listens after the firmware update. Alright, so I've done the software update, and as long as you don't press the shutter button, I mean, it makes a quiet noise, and it focuses pretty slowly, but the question is, does the quiet noise reflect in the video? And if you press the shutter button after the firmware update, alright, so it seems like the 51.8 in the full frame is not as sharp at f1.8 as the APS-C version. Now, this APS-C version is a fantastic lens. I've done another review. I compared it against the Sony Zeiss 55, and it stood up as far as sharpness. It doesn't give you the same kind of background bokeh, but anyway, we're getting off. Background bokeh is decent on the full frame, but then again, it is slightly noisy. Now, if you don't press the shutter button during video, you will be able to survive, but this lens here, the APS-C, is a much quieter lens. Now, it really opens up the discussion. If you're gonna shell out the money for a full frame camera, you probably are more serious about all things photo and video than if you're doing APS-C. And the Sony 55.1.8 is a really good intermediate point, especially if you can get it, on sale, which Sony does many times per year, or during, the post-Thanksgiving Cyber Monday kind of thing. So I would really steer you towards the Sony Zeiss 55.1.8, given all the shortcomings of this lens. If you're serious about photography, it's supposed to be an attractive entry point, but it just falls short in my opinion. And I'm quite surprised how Sony could have put this fantastic APS-C lens out 3 years ago and then sort of dropped the bar as far as quality with the 51.8 in the full frame. So, it's about consistency, it's about maintaining that level of quality and never dropping below it. So now, with other lens manufacturers coming onto the market, because Sony has been doing such an excellent job on its bodies, like Sigma is rumored to have some Sony FE lenses, that will increase the competition, and hopefully in the Mark II, the Sony will get better. And maybe you won't even have to worry about that, because the Sigma 51.8 will get you what you need at the price that you need it. Now, the interesting thing about having a 50, why do you want a 50? Well, one benefit of a full frame, it's supposed to give you a good edge-to-edge sharpness. It's supposed to give you less distortion among the entire frame compared to a zoom lens, which falls short on both of those areas. And most photographers put a lot of money towards the 85, 1.8 or 1.4, but there is a good reason to have a 50-1.8. It gets you a little less, tight, a little wider, but also some people's faces are wide, whether they're big boned or overweight or whatever. And shooting them at 85 is gonna make them look, they say the camera adds 10 pounds, and it's true. The difference between shooting at 85 versus 200, you'll make the person's face look, it just wraps out. So having that 50 is a great option, especially for somebody's doing a portrait for somebody whose face is, not super thin. So that's another great reason to have a 50. Another great reason is that they typically are not as expensive as 85s. As a super professional, I would steer you away from this and steer you towards the Sony Zeiss 55. It's worth every penny. But do try and get it on discount. This is the Hunch Report. Please subscribe. Please give me thumbs up. Check the description below where you can get any of this stuff. And I will see you soon.